Hey there, Keith here from Amethyst Nightmare. You know, today I was sitting in my room, just making some beep boops on my bleep blop machine, as I often do, and the thought occurred to me, I really need to share this with the world. And so today, I thought that I would talk to you a little bit about this guy. So for those of you who maybe aren't synth heads and don't already know this is based off of the Sequential Circuits Pro 1 from 1981. This is the Behringer model. It's part of a collection of vintage synth recreations that they have been just like pumping out like crazy over the last at least a year, couple years. The original Pro 1 was essentially a single voice of the very famous Prophet 5 synthesizer. You can hear it used all throughout the 80s by people like Depeche Mode, New Order, Prince, and Vince Clarke, just to name a few of them. Now I'd like to get right into the sounds of this synth today, so what I thought I would do is play for you a song that I made using exclusively sounds from the Pro 1, with the exception of the drums. And then after that, I'm going to go through 3 patches that I made for the song, so I can kind of give you a tour of the synth as I do so. And then I'll talk a little bit about the arrangement, the workflow, the production, for those of you who are interested in that sort of thing. In addition, you're going to see some patch recall sheets that show up during the song. I've made those available for download as PDFs, so just check the description down below for a link to those. It's a collection of 15 sounds that I created for this song, and I think they'll come in handy if you have either just gotten the Pro 1 or you're thinking about getting one soon and you want something to just sort of throw on there and get your hands dirty real quickly twiddling knobs and figuring out how this thing works. Anyway, sit back, relax, I hope you enjoy the song, and yeah, I'll see you on the other side. Alright, so the sound that I wanted to start with is this one. It's the bass sound from the very beginning of the song. It's the drone that you hear. I thought it would be a great sound to get started showing you around the synthesizer. You can kind of get yourself familiar with it. For now, I am going to turn this off. We'll get back to this at the end. For now, I just want to leave it off. So as you can see, we have two oscillators. There's oscillator A, there's oscillator B. They both have selectable waveforms. This one is sawtooth and square. This one is sawtooth, triangle, and square. You can do combinations of them or them individually. We have adjustable pulse width on each of them for the square wave. We have an adjustable octave and adjustable frequency. Here's the pulse width. Yeah, okay, moving on, we have our mixer section. This is oscillator A and oscillator B. You can see they are turned all the way up. They're at equal volume on this sound. Then finally we have a noise generator. It's just a basic white noise generator. If I turn both the oscillators off, you can hear what that sounds like by itself. Alright, great. Just some basic noise. In addition to that, you can see it says external here. You can put something else in here to use as the external audio input, and this will just adjust the volume of that if you choose to do so. For the glide section, that's pretty simple. It's just a glide that is introduced between notes when the knob is turned up. So right now, there's no glide between notes. It just moves from one to the next. As I turn up the glide, you'll hear there is a slide or a glide in between notes. That's how that works. Moving on from there, we have our filter section. So we just have an adjustable low-pass filter. This is our cutoff frequency. It gets darker as you turn it down, as you turn it up. This sound I left it at about 3. The resonance on this particular filter turns down the volume and takes a lot of the low end out of the sound. So you want to be careful when you're making bass patches with this. A little bit will go a long way. If you turn it up higher, you'll get a thin, squelchy sound. It's a pretty cool sound, but not really what I was going for here. The envelope amount knob just determines how much this filter envelope, which we'll get to in a second, adjusts the cutoff frequency at the start of the note. For the keyboard amount, we have this turned all the way down here. All this does is actually, as you play lower on the keyboard, the cutoff will be lower, and as you play higher on the keyboard, the cutoff will be higher. It just makes the synth behave more like an actual acoustic instrument does. And it's very useful for sort of taming sounds that get shrill as you get high. For our envelopes, we have attack, decay, sustain, and release. For this one, you can see I have a long attack, a long decay. Sustain is all the way down, which means the cutoff will return here, and a medium release. And what that does is just has the filter swell in and then slowly fade out. Sort of mirroring that with the amplitude envelope, which instead of adjusting the cutoff frequency, simply adjusts the volume of the sound. So you can hear what it would sound like, for instance, if I turn the attack all the way fast, you would hear the sound come in immediately. Whereas here, we have it swell in very gradually. That basically covers the basics of what I'm using in this patch. A couple of other little things to note on the synth is we have an LFO, which I am going to go over in a second. We have a built-in sequencer, which is pretty cool, a built-in arpeggiator, which is pretty cool, and then this just kind of controls how the synth is behaving. This poly mode is something introduced in the Behringer. It was not in the original synthesizer, but what it does is when you're in monophonic mode, it simply plays one note at a time. Even if actually split the oscillators. So if you're playing just one note, both oscillators are playing that note. But if you were to play two notes, oscillator A would play the top note and oscillator B would play the bottom note, so you can play chords. Very handy little function. I like it for writing melodies with bass line. It's pretty cool. Then we have retrig and normal. In retrig mode, you're going to be retriggering the filter envelope each time you play a new note. In normal mode, you will not. So in addition to that, you have these two modes right here. This one just repeats the note over and over again. This one just drones on the note. And these are handy for sort of designing your patches. So the last thing that I want to talk about in here is the very cool modulation matrix. It is a surprisingly versatile little modulation section. The way it works is pretty interesting. There are two different buses. There's a direct bus and a wheel bus. So you're sending to the direct bus, receiving on the direct bus. So what you do first is you're going to select one of these. LFO, oscillator B, or filter envelope can all be assigned to modulate any of these parameters. So oscillator A, frequency or pulse width, oscillator B, frequency or pulse width, and the filter cutoff. In this patch, I wanted to modulate two things. I wanted to modulate the filter cutoff frequency, and I wanted to modulate the pulse width of oscillator B. So I set the LFO to the direct bus. I turned it up to about here. I found those two things over here. So this is oscillator B pulse width. It's set to the direct bus. Filter cutoff is set to the direct bus. And now you can hear it is modulating the cutoff frequency. The more I turn this up, the more extreme the effect is. You can see that's the LFO by adjusting the rate. LFO is pretty cool. Just got an adjustable rate. You can change the waveform to be a square. But for this, I just wanted a basic up and down motion, slowly, like that. Yeah, and that's about all there is to this sound. So 2 square waves, equal volume, slow attack, slow decay. Just a very sort of sustaining sound, slow modulation on the filter and the pulse width. Gives it that phasey sound, and that's about it. Throw on some delay and it sounds huge. All right, so the next sound that I wanted to show you is the ostinato sound that plays this throughout the song. You'll also hear it in the beginning playing the little melodic motif of. All right, so I wanted it to sound very brassy, very bright. So I went with sawtooth waves. Those are my go-to for a brassy kind of a sound. You can see oscillator B is set an octave higher from oscillator A. We've got in our mixer section, oscillator A, so the lower octave is a little bit higher in volume, just kind of balancing out the sound. There's no noise, there's no glide, none of this stuff. It's a pretty basic sound, really. Cutoff frequency down here, but we've got quite a bit of envelope controlling that. Also the keyboard amount, so it gets brighter as it goes up the keyboard, darker as you go down. The resonance is really quite high on here, giving it sort of that piercing nasal quality. And it thins out the sound a lot, so it's not stepping on the bass parts at all. You can see we've got much faster attack on this than we did on the previous sound. We've got a faster decay, higher sustain, so it's just a much more sort of in-your-face, more agile kind of a sound than the last one that we were going for. And the last thing that I want to show you with this is over here on the modulation matrix. You can see we have oscillator B. The amount is, I think I actually had it all the way at 10 for this sound. You can see it's going to the direct bus, and on the direct bus we have the filter cutoff frequency. So oscillator B is actually modulating the filter cutoff frequency. And that kind of gives it this angry, buzzy quality that I really like. So without it, it sounds like this. Just hear that sort of squelchy nasalness of the high resonance there. And then if I turn it up, it's got some grit and some attitude now. I just really like that sound. So without it again, turn it up. Suddenly got some attitude. That's about it for that sound. Let's move on to the next one. The last sound that I wanted to talk to you about today is the sync lead, which the sync sound is something that's kind of very typical of the Pro One. It's definitely something you've heard before. It's that kind of wow sound. You hear it in the song playing this part. And I just wanted to go through and show you how that sound is put together. Alright, so straight away you can see that the oscillators are not tuned to each other, so they're both turned up, but you only hear one pitch, right? So something's going on with that. That is the sync mode. So when this is turned on, oscillator A is forced to reset to oscillator B, thereby syncing the sound. If I were to turn that off, you would hear something very different. Turn it on, we get that sync sound. Alright, moving on, you can see we've got cutoff low, we've got quite a bit of envelope controlling the cutoff frequency. Attack is all the way down, so it's got a lot of attack to it. Decays a little bit down to a lower sustained section of the cutoff frequency. Yeah, pretty basic stuff over there. So where this sound really gets interesting is using the filter envelope over here in the modulation matrix to actually modulate the oscillator A's frequency, and that's what gives it that row sound. So without that turned on, we just get definitely a different sound, but not like this. Alright, so that's really what's going on here. This frequency is being modulated over time. We're using the filter envelope to do it, and yeah, sounds like that. The other little thing on here that is something that's very common is using the modulation wheel basically as a vibrato. So you can see I have it set to the wheel bus. We have the wheel bus here, that's oscillator B's frequency. And if I play a note and turn up the modulation wheel, you'll hear a vibrato come in. And that's a really easy way to get vibrato in any sound that you're doing. That's really all I wanted to say about that sound. Alright, so the first thing that you might notice about the session is that it's relatively organized. I have folders over here, like the drums and percussion, I got basses and drones, the mysterious other synths. They're just synthesizers that are performing other functions, leads, and sound effects, and then we've got our effects return buses here. Alright, I've got them color-coded so that it's easy to see everything. And I think the most useful thing for me to do is to go through the song, talk about a little bit about the writing, a little bit about the production and the sound design as I go through, and just explain my thought process to you. So, first thing is let's start with the drums and the bass. Drums I'm not going to talk about too much, though I do want to show you that I'm using Contact for this. I'm actually using samples from another YouTuber named Alex Ball. His channel is really awesome. If you're into this sort of thing, like retrowave music production and synthesizers, his channel's a gold mine. You should definitely check him out. So thanks to Alex for providing those samples. They're really cool and useful. But I'm just going to go ahead and play the drums along with the basses and the drones. And Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and start playing a little bit, and we can take a listen to what the basses and the drums are doing. Starts out with just this drone bass. And then some other stuff comes in. I was supposed to mute that. Alright, there's not much going on with the drone, really. You can see it's got a chorus on it. Just want to talk about this real quick. There's a really cool free plugin. It's the Tal Chorus LX. You can get it on Splice if you want, but it's completely free. It is a chorus that's modeled on the chorus from the Juno 6 or the Juno 106, one of those. And yeah, it's really cool. It's got a very vintage, really lush sound to it, and it's got two different modes, just 1 and 2. The 1 mode is a very gentle chorusing with stereo widening, and 2 is a very much more obvious chorus sound. Enough about that. It's cool. You should pick it up. It's free. In addition to that, you can see I'm sending it over here to the Supermassive, which is another free plugin. So get these two, definitely. Valhalla Supermassive, it is it's kind of like a weird combination, experimental delay reverb plugin, and yeah, that's what it does. It makes things sound like they're in a supermassive space. And that's what I wanted this to sound like it was just kind of floating out there in space. I've also got it sending to the long reverb as well, which is Valhalla Vintage Verb. Here's what that sounds like by itself. Alright, then next up, we've got the main bass sound that comes in when the drums come in. And we'll take a listen to that right now, hear what that's doing. It's a pretty simple bass part. Just a nice big fat warm meaty bass. Sits there with the drums really nicely. I like it. When we get toward the end of the song, something interesting happens. So there's actually two bass parts going on, and I wanted to talk a little bit about arrangement and part writing at this point, because I wrote these two parts to go together. As you can hear, the one picks up where the other leaves off. So I'm just going to go ahead and play it, and I want you to pay attention to how the two parts interact with each other. They're not stepping on each other. The main bass part is playing basically on the 4 and the 1, and then the this sequence bass is playing everywhere else. And let's take a listen to how that works. Alright, cool. So you can hear how they're kind of interacting with each other. It's boom, boom, 2, 3. Yeah, so that's playing on the 4 and the 1. And the other one is 1, dun, 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 4, dun, 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 dun. So it's actually resting on the 1. So you can hear how they're interacting with each other. They're not stepping on each other. And that was very intentional. These are things you want to think about as you're going along. You don't want to just layer bass sounds and get a big old money mess because they're stepping on each other's toes. Okay. At the very ending, we've got just this little drone sound, which is essentially the same drone sound from the beginning, but with one of the oscillators tuned up a major third, and I recorded it twice, once an octave up. So that's the lower octave. Here's the upper octave. I threw on some auto pan to give it just a little bit more movement. These also have the chorus on them. And together. Just for that nice little warm hug at the very end of the song. Oh, another thing that I want to talk about as far as mixing between these two basses here. This one, I used the chorus just to kind of spread it out to get it out of the middle, out of the way of the main bass. And very important is to high pass anything that doesn't need low end. We'll see that as I go throughout the song. The only things you really want to have low end are your bass and your kick. Anything else is just going to get muddy. So we want to cut it out. Let's move on to the other synths now. First thing you'll hear is this sequence part that plays throughout much of the song. And yeah, you hear that now. Yeah, it's just a plucky bass sound kind of thing. That again, I high pass to keep it out of the way of the bass. And it is panning around the stereo field, just giving a little bit of movement to the track. This other part that you heard to come in with the melodic motif is labeled ostinato because that is its primary function throughout the rest of the song. It only plays that little melody there. But it comes in with the main bass and the drums right here, and you'll hear that. Then I want to bring in this other part. It's playing a little downward arpeggio that just fills in a little bit of the blank space. That's a really plucky, metallic kind of a sound. And I wanted that to sound like it was in its own space, so instead of sending it out to a reverb bus, I actually put an instance of Valhalla Vintage Verb right on the track to get it sitting in its own space. It's also auto panning just to give a little bit of movement. The next parts I want to talk about are these chords here. So you might ask yourself, how do you play chords on a monosynth? Well, it's pretty simple, really. You record each voice of the chord separately. So in these chords, there are 3 voices or 4 voices here at times, and I recorded them all separately. Here's what they sound like. Okay, so pretty cool. Got some chords in there. These are all being sent out to this bus, which has, again, the Tal chorus. It's one of my favorite plugins for doing this kind of music. It has the RC20, which is another really awesome plugin. Not free, but awesome if you can afford to pick it up. I would recommend it, especially if you're doing any kind of like retro wave, synth wave, anything that we want to sound kind of vintage. All this is really doing is adding a little bit of space and a little bit of bit crushing. Doing a high pass as well on this because we don't need that low end. All right, next thing is this arpeggiator. So it's a very brassy, bright kind of sounding arpeggio that is, again, auto panning. Most of the other ones are sort of a sinusoidal auto pan where it's just slowly moving back and forth. This is a square wave, so it's sort of jumping back and forth from left to right. And you can hear what that sounds like. So that's just a really cool sound. I like it. Gonna move on now to the lead parts so we can hear what those sound like. And I'm just gonna turn everything on so you can hear the leads in context. First thing I want to talk about is at the very beginning. This is a writing tip. There's this melodic motif that is played here and doesn't come back until a little bit later. It just kind of introduces the melody for later, and it kind of introduces the synth sounds that are going to be used for leads throughout the song by passing the melody around between them. And here's what that sounds like isolated. Alright, so you can hear that the sound is just kind of getting passed around between all those various lead sounds that will come back in later with that melodic motif, which shows up later. And then we've got this next synth sound that comes in after that little vamp on the just drums and bass. It's actually two lead sounds. Let me just turn all these guys off. So we've got this high kind of metallic plucky lead. Yeah, I love that sound. I've also got this main lead sound that kind of gets stacked up later with harmonies, and there's some slight variations in the sound, but this is our like primary lead sound for the song. Together. Alright, so that's what those sound like. A little bit farther down, I double the lead sound up in the octave, just to help the track build a little bit. And then after that, in the B section, I introduce three other sounds. Well, it's two sounds really. There's this lead part here, which is just kind of a very smooth lead sound. And then I have these two bell sounds. Just like a very bright bell sound. That's, I've got one recorded. It's recorded in octaves. One's an octave up, one's an octave down. The octave down one is panned left. The octave up one is panned to the right. And together they sound like this. In context, they sound like this. Alright, that's that. Moving on, this is actually one of the sounds that we went over. This is a sync sound, and this is playing that melodic motif from the beginning. Comes back in here. And as you can hear, the drums and bass drop out there to accommodate this, you know, it's sort of to signal something new and important is being introduced, and that's this new melody. Then it picks back up. Sorry, the bass didn't actually cut out, but I did lower the cutoff frequency of the bass just to move it out of the way at that point, and it comes back up here. And there's that little lead-in part. And that just helps to bring it into the next section. I just want to talk a bit about the arrangement again. So this is at the end of the song. We have the main melody come back from the first, I guess, verse, if you want to call it verse. But as you can hear this time, we've added a harmony. Then something interesting happens, which is the two different lead sounds, the one that's and the how's it go? Those sounds actually play together now, and like with the bass parts, I wrote this intentionally to go together. So the one part picks up where the other leaves off. It's basic counterpoint, but it's important to think about these kinds of things as you're going through. That's the reason I can have this big sort of climactic ending where all of the elements suddenly come together from the song. And yeah, here's what that sounds like. And as you heard, there was another harmony that just came in there, just to beef it up a little bit more as it gets towards the big climactic ending. Yeah, but you could hear the parts were not stepping on each other's toes. They were working in conjunction with one another. Yeah, that's what I was going for with this, getting those parts to work together. Something I meant to mention before is that I have these all bust out, with the exception, I think, of the basses and the drums. They're treated a little bit differently. But all of these other synthesizers are bust out. And see what I'm doing here is just high passing everything so that they're all staying out of the way of the bass and the kick. I can't stress enough how big a difference that makes in decluttering your low end and making your mixes less muddy. As you can see, like, because I thought so much about the arrangement as I went through, I'm going over here to the right. You can see I hardly had to do anything as far as the mix goes. It was very basic stuff because I tried to get the sounds right from the source. All right, now we're going to move on to sound effects. This is just basically like transition sounds and little things that you'll hear throughout the song. There's not really that much going on as far as these are concerned. Got some noise sweeps. And just some little ear candy that pulls the listener in as we enter a new section. You can hear what it sounds like in context. Again, this is going into the B section. It's the same thing. And then this crazy sound effect that comes in at the end very softly. You might not have even heard it. And I don't even remember what I did on the Pro one, but I was just messing around with some of the patching and modulation options that were available, and just fiddling with some knobs, and this is what the noise that I came up with. And I think it just adds another like bit of tension towards the end of the song as it builds to the climax, like this. All right, and as you can hear at the very end, a couple of other sounds joined in just to sweep up into the ending where that drone is. And it's that big build up as everything is tense, 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 and then it's just a nice, warm, reassuring hug at the end on a nice G major chord. Just to let you know everything's going to be okay. And here's what that sounds like in context. Alright, and that is pretty much it for the arrangement and the mix. You can see my effects returns here. I've got some reverbs. Basically got a short reverb, a long reverb, a short delay, long delay. I've got the supermassive, which is mainly just for those drone sounds to make them sound huge, like they're floating out in space. Really important note about reverbs. Again, I can't say this enough. You need to clean up your low end by high passing. I don't suggest you high pass everything. I know some people say high pass everything. I don't want you to think that that's a blanket statement. In most instances, the bottom end of your reverb is just going to muddy up the mix, so take it out. You don't need it. That's essentially everything on the stereo mix bus, which is the bus that everything is getting sent to at the end. I have the RC20 again. I started with this VHS preset. I took off some of the things. I think there was some bit crushing going on here with the digital module. And I brought the magnitude way down. So right now what it's doing, it's got this EQ here. You can see it's not really doing anything to the low end, because with the magnitude, that's actually where the line is. But you can see it's pulling off a little bit of the high end, just kind of dulling the sound a little bit. It's just adding some very little wow and flutter effects and some gentle noise, just to give it a slight vintage effect. You could certainly push this thing hard and make it sound like it was recorded to old tape. Oops. And that's not what I wanted to do with this song. I wanted a very subtle effect. So I'll push it up now so you can hear what that sounds like. But like I said, that's not what I was going for with this song. It wouldn't make sense to put that on the stereo mix bus. A really cool tool that I would recommend if you just want to throw something on your mix bus to clean it up instantly. I mean, this thing is as close to like a magic plugin as you're gonna get. Yeah, I don't really know how else to describe it. It's a dynamic equalizer that just works in an extremely musical way, and yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. This was just part of my mastering chain, which this is actually unmastered now, what you're listening to. But it just helps you to get an overall idea of what the tonal balance is as you play the song. And that just kind of helps you to see if you're in the ballpark of what's typical for a specific genre. That's pretty cool too. That comes with Ozone 9. So another quick little thing that I wanted to go over with you is the workflow that I use for this song, which isn't something that I've done before, but it worked out really well. So as I was writing the song, instead of using the Pro One and having to commit everything to audio, I wanted to be able to sort of write freely, go back, change things, all that. So what I did was I used the Prophet V3 from Arturia, which is, the V collection is incredible. I think I'm going to do a series of videos on those in the future. But this is the Prophet. As I mentioned earlier in the video, the Pro One is essentially like a single voice of the Prophet. So creating monophonic sounds using this Prophet got me pretty close to the sound of the Pro One. So I was able to mock it up using this, and that's exactly what I did. So I had the entire song playing through various instances of the Prophet from Arturia, and then once I was happy with all of the parts and everything, and I had played everything in and cleaned it all up. It was just a matter of tweaking, dialing in the sounds on the Pro 1. And as I went through mocking it up, I wasn't worried about the exact sound that I was getting because I knew I was going to replace it. I was more concerned with what the function of the sound was. Is this a bass sound? Is this something that's going to be plucky? I'll just get generally a plucky sound. And it was a pretty cool experience because anytime that I was confused on the Pro 1 about how to get a particular sound, I could actually go through the presets on there, see what was happening with, the oscillators, the filter, all those settings, and start dialing it in and be like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like stuff I wouldn't think of to do that I saw in the presets, and that actually sparked a lot of the sounds that I used. So some parting thoughts on the Pro 1. Would I recommend buying this synth? Yeah, definitely I would. So if you're someone who is after the sound of the Pro 1 and you can't shell out a bunch of money to buy an old synthesizer and you don't feel like dealing with, replacing some of the clunky hardware that the original one came with, this is your best bet. It sounds amazing. I love it. To my ears, it sounds indistinguishable from the original, especially for someone like me. I mean, I've been working with software synthesizers for well over a decade now, and it's amazing how many things about synthesis just started to click in the last couple of months while I was working with this. There's just something about the actual tactile, physical experience of, turning knobs and hearing what it sounds like that I don't think you get from software. So, even if you are just a producer who works with software exclusively and you've been in it for a long time and have never really gotten your hands on an analog synth, this is a perfect opportunity. It's affordable, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. I hope you found something that was useful in here. I hope you found it enjoyable. And if either of those things are true, I would really appreciate it if you click subscribe or like. One or both of those would be cool. So let me know in the comments if you found anything particularly useful or not useful, if I blabbed on for too long about something. Let me know if there's something that I didn't cover that you would like to see me cover. Stay safe out there. I hope to see you in the next video.